This is about giving detailed and personalised feedback, even for large classes. Something it's often very hard to do because the classes are so large. I'll explain. When we talk about assessing our students, we spend a great deal of time thinking about how we're going to assess, what the actual assessment item is going to be, whether it's going to be realistic, whether it's going to be relevant, whether it's going to be challenging, whether it will distinguish amongst students. But one very neglected aspect to me seems to be the amount of feedback we provide to our students who've completed this assessment item. Well, assessment feedback is all linked with marking, usually anyway. And the problem with marking is that marking is time consuming. Marking is seen, I think, almost universally as dull. If you meet someone in the corridor and say, hey, what are you doing? I'm marking. You don't say, gee, aren't you lucky? Wow, you can have a wow couple of weeks. You say, oh dear, I hope it goes well. Marking is seen as a chore. And because of this, and especially in large classes, with limited time in which to get the results back to the students, sometimes you don't give much feedback. One of my colleagues said to me, I just give a percentage. That's just an example. I just give a percentage at the bottom. They don't read my comments anyway, so why make them? Other colleagues use a marking matrix, which is based on the learning outcomes for that assessment. You have the learning outcomes listed on the left. I'll just do 3 for brevity. Clear writing, logic, and Laz put in references. And then you have criteria. What sort of clear writing you need for a fail minus, or a fail, or a pass, or a credit, or a distinction, or a high distinction. And you put those in there. They're automatically printed already for you. Then all you do is put a tick in each box in relation to how you think each student went on these criteria and give a percentage at the bottom. That's a bit more feedback, but not a great deal. It's also very impersonal. But nevertheless, it's more than just a percentage. But this raises the interesting paradox, and that paradox is that we are constantly seeking feedback from our students. We're seeking it. We are encouraging, well, no, students are asked to hit that big red have your say button on Moodle to give their impression of how our teaching was and how our courses were. We all hope we're going to make that 50% KPI so that we're there. But paradoxically, we're seeking loads and loads of feedback from our students. We really want it, and yet quite often we don't give our students very much feedback on the assessment tasks they have laboured over for many, many hours. So how can we expect them to give us feedback if we don't give it to them anyway? Well, with this in mind, and because I also, page turning, you heard that, because I teach large classes. For example, last spring summer, I'm not bragging, I had a class of 350. Each student wrote an essay, a 1,600-word essay, and I marked all of those by myself using a method that made it very easy for me to get through 20 essays a day, so it took less than 20 days. That's what I want to talk about today, and it is so straightforward and simple, it's incredible. It works for a written assignment, but it could work for quite a few assessment items. And that is, I make use of the clipboard in Microsoft Word. I talked about this a week ago. One of my colleagues said, I don't even know where the clipboard is, what is it? So therefore, I'm going to show you. Great, there's an essay up on the screen, but on the left of this essay there is the clipboard. You may be saying, where the hell did that come from? Well, on the very left of Word, if you're on the Home tab, there's a little thing that says Clipboard, and if you click on the right-hand side of that, you can see that, then it goes away. That's not very handy. But if you click again, it comes back. And you can populate that clipboard with little bits of text or paragraphs, or even whole essays if you wanted, by simply highlighting them and hitting copy. Bang, that turns up on the clipboard. You can paste from the clipboard into a document simply by going to that entry and either clicking on it. I'll be looking for more specific detail, but I'm really messing up this essay already. Or you can right click and paste. But as I mark essays, as I start on the 350, after about the first 10, I've already realised I'm writing the same phrases over and over again. So those phrases, as soon as I realise I'm doing that, get copied and added to the clipboard where they're available to put into the next essay which requires them. Over time your clipboard grows and evolves. Even some items may become deleted as you work through the stack of essays and more added, but it's a very, very easy way of adding detail comments to an essay. I just get rid of those. Okay, I'm going to page through the essay and show you what I have done. I've made comments in red. This was a bad essay, so I had to write quite a lot. I've put comments in red and I've also highlighted in yellow. It's pretty easy to do that. I've made remarks as I've gone through. There's a classic here, non-conclusive ischemic colitis. They meant non-occlusive. Unfortunately, Spellcheck came along and did their essay for them. Quite a few comments and a paragraph at the end which has a grade and a percentage and my name, but also some general comments to the student. Now, that didn't take me long because apart from having the phrases I put into the essay, many of those on the clipboard, I also had a separate document with these sorts of remarks in there because I realised once I've marked about 10 or 15 essays, you can usually subdivide the concluding paragraph of comments into about 5 categories. One for the real stinkers that haven't done very well, one for the ones that have done fantastically, and 3 for the ones in between. Then you just modify that text a bit, make reference back to something you've read in the essay, and it's a personalised comment. So, very briefly, I'll just try another one. Gee, I didn't say much on this one, except you'll notice I said this is excellent. That's a nice thing to say. If a student's done well, it's nice to know your lecturer has read it and said that in the text. Here's another one. This is an interesting aspect from the clipboard that no other student, in brackets I put to date, essay number 143, I was in a bad way that day, has discussed. At the very end, this is a very good point, straight from the clipboard. I'm reading, the student knows I've read it. Now that's encouragement. It's an HD already, I'll keep reading. And it went on a bit. Okay, final comment at the end. Yep, I gave this person 100%. I thought it was a fantastic essay, and it didn't bother me that I'd given 100% at all. They deserved it, I felt. So I'm just using, really, effectively a cut and paste function in Word to give what appears to be personalised feedback. Well, it is, but it's an easy way of doing it. The other thing I do, I'll leave the screen up, the other thing I do is that as I go through marking the essays, I start to get a bit of a list up of general things, general comments. If people have done a lot of confusion of affect and effect, I write that down. If they've typed bodies, B-O-D-I-E-S instead of B-O-D-Y-S, I put that in as well. And at the end of having marked the essays, I've got a list, and I turn that list into a document called General Feedback on the Essay. Some of this document stays the same from year to year, like the first bit. I spell out the grades and marks. I say what an HD is, I say what marks are on the borderline. That stops me getting emails from students saying, you only gave me a percentage, what grade is that? Or a student saying, you only gave me a grade, what percentage is that? Or a student saying, you gave me a C plus D minus, what does that mean? If I tell them in this document, I don't get so many emails. I give general comments. I give a graph that shows performance in relation to the class. The student can work out what they got. These people never submitted an essay. They got 0. Comments about grammar. loose instead of lose. Oh my goodness me. Comments then about the essay topic itself, and concluding with a little reminder that you really can't write essays for me in a day because they're not those sorts of essays. But every student was given an electronic copy of this, of course, via the Moodle site, together with personalised feedback on their essay. Now, you may say, gee, that sounds pretty simple. Well, it was, but it worked just fine. The students commented about my feedback in their feedback. They were very, very kind indeed. They even said, we don't like just getting a percentage from other people. Gosh, I would never solicit that sort of remark. They said that, they volunteered it. Some said, what you've given us is so much better than a mark on a marking matrix. One person called it on the frame. Well, not held there in many for a while, because we know where we went wrong and why. The students who did well, several of those emailed me and said, I did well, and for the first time in my academic career, because I've always done well, you've actually given me feedback about why I've done well. That's great. I'll be able to use those aspects in other essays and continue to do well. Heavens above, if someone does well, tell them. It's a nice feeling. The students who didn't do well, and some students unfortunately got pretty low marks, several of those again emailed me because I had commented about their essays in some detail and given them some advice about their writing, because often they didn't do well because they didn't write well. Their essays weren't well organised, they rambled, they weren't logical, they were full of mistakes. I referred some to the Academic Learning Centre. But they emailed to say, thank you so much indeed. For the first time, a lecturer has told me how I can actually improve. I mean, that's pretty good when someone does very badly and they thank you for the feedback. And they weren't being nasty either. And that was reflected in the student satisfaction scores on the Have Your Say. Out of a class of 350, there was not a single request for a review of grade, which helped my time management no end. Now, as I said, I'm talking about an essay, but this can apply to other forms of assessment as well, where if they're written and you need to comment on written work, it certainly made my life very easy. I got the essays back in double quick time. I wasn't even all that knocked around by it either. But in conclusion, that sounds formal, in conclusion, really this raises the point that what are we here for? It sounds like deep philosophy indeed. What are we at CQ University Australia, are we here just to assess? Are we here to assess like someone assesses the condition of a car? They tick boxes, windscreen wipers working, bearings sound good, all that sort of stuff. Or are we actually here to teach and to help people learn? Because if you only give a percentage or very little feedback, you're just assessing. That's really all you're doing. But if you give feedback, then your feedback is a formative process, or can be a formative process for the student, where they can take those remarks and actually improve. Well, I firmly believe we are here to teach. And yes, some of us have large classes, but even in large classes, there are tricks and techniques for giving the student appropriate feedback, and even to give it that personal flavour, which when you read something you think, wow, that person's really spent the time and read it all the way through, then you feel much better off even if you don't do well.